It's that old man again, defacing the walls. Who buys these scribbles nowadays? The dismissive remark, uttered by a man in a sharp suit, quickly faded into the clamor of the Manhattan subway station. From inside the ticket booth, Chloe looked up from her thick engineering textbook. Her gaze swept past the departing passenger and settled on a secluded corner of the station, where an elderly artist was diligently hunched over his rickety easel. After her shift, she didn't head straight for the exit as usual. Instead, she walked towards the artist. "Hello," Chloe said softly. The man looked up, his dim eyes showing a hint of surprise. "Tonight, do you have any drawings of moving trains?" The old man looked at the young woman, whose eyes were shadowed from lack of sleep, then back at his charcoal sketches. "Moving trains?" he asked, his voice a little hoarse. "They're always moving. But no one wants to buy a picture of what they see every day, child. People want to see the stars." "But I find it beautiful in its own way," Chloe replied, pulling a few loose coins from her pocket. "It's like a promise that no matter how late it gets, there's always a ride to take us home." She offered him the coins. "I'll take this one." The old artist silently unfastened a sketch of a train plunging into a tunnel and handed it to her. "Thank you for your kindness." Chloe carefully rolled up the drawing. "Thank you for being here, for drawing the things we often miss." With that, she turned and merged into the dwindling crowd of the night, holding a drawing that the world seemed to disregard. The drawing accompanied Chloe back to her small apartment in Brooklyn, where a different reality awaited. The desk lamp in her room illuminated a towering stack of engineering textbooks and a tuition debt notification on her laptop screen. This was Chloe's world, a two-year-old engineering student. Her night shifts at the subway station were the only way she could afford tuition and living expenses. Her life was filled with numbers, from formulas and textbooks to bills that needed paying. She tacked the newly bought drawing onto her wall next to other old sketches. Each drawing was worth a day's meal. Her friends, if they knew, would surely call her foolish. And this wasn't the first time she had done so. Buying a drawing had become a habit, a silent weekly ritual. After each paycheck, Chloe would set aside a few loose coins. That money could buy a more substantial meal or a few bus rides to save her the walk home. But she chose to spend it on a charcoal sketch that no one else cared for. She didn't do it out of a love for art, but because she wanted the old man to know that, among the thousands of people who passed by every day, there was one person who saw him. Just one person stopping, perhaps, was enough. She sat down at her desk, opened her book, and continued to study. The night was long, and she had to keep going. A few nights later, the weather turned windy. A cold draft swept into the station through cracks, bringing the biting chill of the night. In a lull between passengers, a hacking, sputtering cough suddenly broke the silence, making Chloe lift her head from her book. In the familiar, secluded corner, the old artist was huddled, his back hunched, his shoulders trembling with each cough. A few passers-by glanced at him before quickening their pace, as if the cold and infirmity might be contagious. Chloe looked down at the old scarf wrapped around her neck. It was a slightly faded woolen scarf, a gift from her mother years ago. Without a moment's hesitation, she unwrapped it, stepped out of the ticket booth, and approached the old man. "It's getting windy. Wear this to keep warm." She didn't wait for him to respond, just gently draped her still warm scarf around his neck. The old man froze, his thin hands holding the charcoal stick pausing. He looked up at her without a word, but in his dim eyes an unusual warmth flickered, brighter than the neon lights of the station. Chloe simply nodded subtly and quickly returned to her ticket booth, leaving the old artist with the old scarf and a speechless bewilderment. The next day, in the noisy cafeteria of Columbia University, Maya, her close classmate, set her tray down opposite Chloe and looked at her with an inscrutable gaze. "I stopped by the subway station last night looking for you," Maya began. "Oh? Why didn't you call me?" Chloe asked, trying to shake off the fatigue of a long night. "I saw you were busy," Maya said, narrowing her eyes knowingly. "With your art patron. Another drawing?" Chloe remained silent, stirring her drink gently. She knew that tone. "Chloe," Maya lowered her voice, leaning forward, "I don't mean anything by it, but you work so hard for every penny. Why waste money on those scribbled drawings? That money, added up, would be enough to buy you a good reference book instead of having to photocopy." Maya's words were not wrong. They were obvious truths, the logic Chloe wrestled with every day. "Do you really think he needs your kindness? Or are you just naive, Chloe?" Maya asked directly. Chloe didn't look at her friend. Her gaze drifted out the window, but in her mind, she saw the image of the old artist huddled in his corner. She saw hundreds of people walk past him as if he were air, an invisible and forgotten part of the old wall. She turned back, met Maya's eyes directly, her voice not argumentative, simply sharing. "I don't know if he needs my kindness," Chloe said softly. "I just know what it feels like to be invisible. To Maya, and perhaps the world, it was a few wasted coins. But to Chloe, it was an exchange. If her meager coins could buy a moment, even a brief one, where a human being no longer felt alone and invisible, then it was entirely worth it." The debate ended there, but Maya's question lingered in the air like a warning. And just a few weeks later, that warning seemed to come true. Chloe received an email from her faculty advisor requesting an urgent meeting. She walked into his office with a rare optimism. Her graduation project, a next-generation subway signal simulation system, was making significant progress. She had dedicated hundreds of hours, sacrificing countless nights of sleep for it. This was her ticket out of her current life. But contrary to her expectations, the professor didn't look at her with pride. He looked tired and somewhat apologetic. "Chloe," he began, his voice full of regret, "I have some bad news. Due to sudden budget cuts in the department, the committee has had to reevaluate research projects. Projects requiring high costs for simulation hardware have had their funding suspended." Each word from the professor felt like an invisible hammer blow. Chloe felt her ears ring. "Suspended? What does that mean?" she asked again, her voice trembling. "I'm very sorry," he sighed. "It means we no longer have the funding to purchase the control microchips and specialized software. Your project cannot continue." Chloe's world collapsed right there. The ticket she had poured her heart into creating had just been torn up before her eyes. Chloe didn't remember how she left the professor's office. Everything seemed to blur, and the only sound she heard was the echo of the phrase, "Your project cannot continue." That night, the Manhattan subway station, where she worked to nurture her dream, now looked like a tomb burying that very dream. The screech of the trains sounded like a mockery. Every passenger who passed, every ticket she sold, was a reminder of the future she had just lost. The harsh reality was like a wall in front of her. Without the project, she wouldn't be able to graduate on time. Not graduating on time meant tuition debt would pile up, and she had no way to pay for an extended semester. All her efforts, sleepless nights, hurried meals, all suddenly became meaningless. Stuck. That was the only word in her head. She was trapped. As dawn was about to break, after a long night immersed in despair, a cold and cruel thought began to form in her mind. Drop out. She wouldn't try to find another topic, wouldn't ask for an extension. She would give up. She would apply to work full-time at some factory in New Jersey or a cleaning job, anything that could pay the bills immediately. Manual labor, no degree needed, no future. The dream of becoming a technology engineer, someone who designs complex systems, seemed to be over. From now on, she would just be a tiny cog operating within someone else's system. That night, Chloe worked like a machine. No more books, no more hopes. In her mind, the withdrawal form was already filled out, just waiting for morning to be submitted. Her future now seemed as dark and straight as this subway tunnel, with no turns. When her shift ended, she wearily packed her belongings. This time, she wasn't in the mood to buy another drawing. Small acts of kindness seemed meaningless when her own life was falling apart. She kept her head down, hurried past the familiar corner, wanting only to escape that place quickly. Wet child. A voice rang out, no longer hoarse and weak as usual, but clear and steady. Chloe paused, turning in surprise. The old artist had risen from his stool. He didn't offer a charcoal sketch, but a large scroll of paper, carefully rolled up. "This is for you," he said, his eyes serious as he looked at her. Chloe hesitated, taking the scroll. It was heavier and stiffer than ordinary drawing paper. Curious, she unrolled it right under the station lights. Her heart almost stopped. It wasn't a work of art. Before her was a complete technical drawing, rendered in blue ink with millimeter-precise lines. Complex symbols, intricate specifications, detailed notes on the subway's signal and power distribution system. It wasn't just any drawing. It was the detailed blueprint for the very subway line she was standing on. Moreover, in one corner of the drawing, she saw a diagram for an improved signaling system, an elegant and brilliant solution to the very problem she had been stuck on in her graduation project. Chloe's breath hitched. This was not the work of a failed artist. This was the work of a master engineer. Slowly, she lifted her head, looking at the man she had always called the old artist. And for the first time, she truly saw him. Under the yellowish light, he stood tall, and in his eyes was a sharpness, an intellect that had been hidden for too long. The weariness seemed to have vanished, replaced by a quiet dignity. How did you? Chloe stammered, her hands still trembling as she held the drawing tightly. The man looked directly into her eyes, a subtle smile playing on his lips. "I see you've realized it's no ordinary sketch." He paused for a moment, letting the truth sink in. "My name is Adrian Cross." That name struck her mind like lightning. Adrian Cross. The legendary name she had read about repeatedly in textbooks on transportation engineering. The pioneer who laid the foundation for this entire city's subway system. A name enshrined in history, but people said he had completely disappeared after retirement. Adrian saw the utter astonishment on Chloe's face. He pointed to the drawing in her hand, then gestured towards the dark tunnel. "I was the chief engineer who designed this entire subway line many years ago." Chloe felt her legs go weak. The man to whom she had given a few loose coins each week, the man whom she had wrapped her old scarf around, was actually a living legend in her field of study. Her entire worldview seemed to flip in this very moment. "But why?" Chloe stammered, the question almost unconscious. "Why would someone like you have to do this?" Adrian looked deep into the young woman's still bewildered eyes. "I don't have to do this, Chloe. I choose to." He glanced around the deserted station, where he had sat for months. When I retired, I established a private research fund, a fund to support young engineers, those who would shape the future of this industry. But I didn't want to give it to just anyone. He turned back, his gaze sharpening. I could go to any university and pick the brightest students based on their grades. But I wasn't looking for grades. I was looking for a successor with something far more important. Chloe held her breath, listening. I believe a great engineer needs not only a brilliant mind, but also a heart that observes and empathizes. Because what we build is not inanimate iron, but structures that serve humanity, Adrian explained. So, I set up this easel. This subway station was my test. He smiled, a somewhat bitter smile. Thousands of people pass through here every day. They're rushed, they're busy. In their eyes, I'm just a failed old man, an invisible nuisance. But you were different. He looked directly at Chloe. You were the only one who stopped. Week after week, you patiently bought drawings that the world scorned. You gave a little of your warmth without asking for anything in return. You didn't just see an old artist. You saw a human being. That's compassion and patience. Those are the qualities I've been searching for all this time. Adrian's words still echoed in Chloe's mind as she stood stunned, unable to believe what she had just heard. The withdrawal form in her pocket now felt heavy and meaningless. Adrian saw the confusion on her face and the lingering despair. I overheard your conversation with your faculty advisor, he said, his tone shifting from formal to concerned, about your project's funding being cut. Chloe looked up astonished. My research fund isn't just for finding a successor, Adrian continued, a warm smile appearing. It also has a more practical purpose, to ensure that worthy ideas are never extinguished simply for lack of funding. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a light but confident touch. Chloe, consider your research project to have found a new sponsor. All costs for simulation hardware, specialized software, and anything else you need to complete it, my fund will cover. Tears began to well up in Chloe's eyes, not from despair, but from an overwhelming, unexpected joy. The burden that had weighed her down for days was suddenly lifted. Furthermore, Adrian said, pointing to the technical drawing in her hand, this is the solution to your problem. Study it, develop it into your own. It is yours. The door that had seemed to slam shut in front of Chloe was now not only open, but led to a path far grander than she had ever dared to dream. Adrian's support wasn't limited to financial aid. It was like a master key, opening doors that Chloe hadn't even known existed before. A few days later, he called her to a small cafe in Greenwich Village. Sitting at the table with him were not hurried passers-by, but two leading engineers whose names Chloe had only seen on book covers and in scientific articles, Sir Stephen Reynolds and Dr. Evelyn Reed. They were Adrian's old friends, his former colleagues. He introduced her not as a poor student in need of help, but as the young researcher I'm mentoring, one of the most promising minds I've ever encountered. During that meeting, Chloe wasn't just listened to. She was questioned, debated. She presented her project's direction, and those legendary figures listened attentively, offering invaluable advice and treating her as a true colleague. They saw in her not just textbook knowledge, but the potential Adrian had discovered. Such meetings didn't happen just once. Adrian became her mentor, her guide. He took her to workshops at MIT, introduced her to the vast network of contacts he had built throughout his life. Chloe's name, from an unknown student, began to be mentioned in professional circles as a promising young talent personally guided by Chief Engineer Adrian Cross. With funding from the foundation and Adrian's guidance, Chloe's graduation project was not only revived, but achieved accomplishments far exceeding expectations. Her improved signal system design, developed based on Adrian's foundation, made a significant impact on the scientific committee and received excellent reviews. She graduated with honors, but more importantly than the degree, she gained recognition and trust from leaders in the industry. Immediately after graduation, she didn't have to struggle to find a job like her friends. One of the leading transportation technology companies in Silicon Valley, where Adrian had introduced her to engineers, offered her a position. They didn't look at experience. They looked at her potential and the groundbreaking projects she had completed. Chloe threw herself into her work with all the passion and effort she had cultivated through her difficult years. She no longer worked for money. She worked to create value. Practical experience combined with a solid knowledge base and Adrian's remote mentorship helped her mature rapidly. Many years later, the spotlight shone on Chloe. She was no longer the student with dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep, but a successful engineer, a keynote speaker at an international technology conference in San Francisco. She stood before hundreds of leading experts, presenting the intelligent transportation system that she and her colleagues had developed. After the technical presentation concluded, the moderator asked her a side question, "Miss Chloe, what has been the greatest inspiration on your impressive career path?" The entire auditorium fell silent, awaiting an answer about a complex theory or some academic role model. Chloe smiled, a warm and sincere smile. Her eyes gazed into the distance, as if returning to the subway station of years past. "My greatest inspiration," she began, her voice resonating throughout the hall, "did not come from books or lecture halls. It came from an old artist I met at a subway station and his scribbled charcoal drawings." There were a few murmurs of surprise among the audience. Chloe continued, "At that time, I was just a poor student, and spending a few coins on those drawings was illogical. But I did it. I chose to believe in something that no one else seemed to see value in." She paused briefly, allowing her words to sink into everyone's minds. "I learned that sometimes the path to the future doesn't begin with grand plans or clever calculations. Sometimes it begins with a very small act of kindness, from daring to place faith and buy a drawing that the whole world dismissed." In the audience, amidst the elegant suits and intellectual faces, sat an elderly man with white hair, quietly. Adrian Cross smiled, a proud smile. He hadn't come as a legend, but simply as a mentor to witness the success of the student he had found in the cold. Chloe's gaze swept across the room and settled on Adrian. They exchanged a silent nod, a connection that transcended all words. She concluded her speech with a final message, a message not for engineering minds, but for human hearts. Genuine kindness and patience will eventually be rewarded. Perhaps not immediately, nor in the way we expect, but certainly it will be rewarded in ways far more unexpected and grand than we could ever imagine. Applause erupted throughout the hall. As Chloe stepped down from the podium, she was not just a successful engineer, but a living testament to a simple truth. The path built with bricks of kindness will ultimately lead to the most solid and brilliant future.